You're watching TelecomTV's exclusive video coverage from the NGMN industry event here in Frankfurt. Joining me now is Kevin Holly, who is Head of Standards at Telefonica. Kevin, thanks for talking with us today. What is Telefonica's specific role within the 5G standards process?
I think when you look at standards in general, you can't do something on your own. Standards are there so that everybody gets access to the same technology. So standards is a collaborative thing by its very nature. So Telefonica is very keen to engage with the other operators at one level, but also our vendors as well. Our vendors really help us with getting the things that we want into standards. Telefonica, of course, is quite a particular operator because we have operations not only in Europe, but also in Latin America. And the Latin America spectrum situation is actually quite challenging. It's different from Europe. So we can't cuddle up to Orange and Vodafone and say, oh, yeah, we've got the same concept, because actually we've got different requirements in Latin America because the spectrum is different.
There are many versions and visions of what 5G could and should be. What's Telefonica's definition of 5G?
Well, if you go back to the heritage, so first of all, 2G, 1G was analog. 2G was the first digital system and introduced text messaging, and then we got a little bit of dribble of data. 3G was supposed to be global mobile multimedia. I don't know if you ever saw those reports. And that effectively it was the first multimedia system. And then 4G was IP-based mobile broadband. And now for 5G, we're looking to push the envelope a bit more. I think the one thing that really distinguishes 5G from 4G is going to be the personalisation. So rather than saying, okay, everybody's got the same requirements, you're all in the same bucket, you all get whatever we can deliver where you happen to be, it's a question of saying, okay, well, this user is an Internet of Things user. So what does he need? He needs low power. So we need to make sure he doesn't have to transmit at high power. He needs to be able to get on the network and get off quickly, deliver his packets, and that's it. So we don't need a huge bandwidth, and we need to cater to the specifics of the transmission. A mobile broadband user, will be pretty much like 4G, but when he's at the cell edge, he really wants a better performance than today. So, today the performance of LTE drops off when you get towards the edge. What we're looking to do with NGMN is give a minimum of 50 megabits across the whole cell. And then you've got other use cases that we talk about in the 5G white paper, which include tactile internet. And when you're trying to manipulate something, they're really talking about down to millisecond. It may not be 1 millisecond, a few milliseconds end-to-end delay. But again, not everybody needs that all the time. So it's a question of personalising the capabilities to the user at the time, what they need.
How does an operator such as Telefonica not necessarily influence, but how does it steer the standards process?
There's a lot of research done by a lot of companies, including ourselves. We engage with the European research programs quite heavily. We've just been awarded some programs in the 5G PPP, which gives us a starting point. So we understand the base technology. But I think when you go to the detailed standards like 3GPP, those are really driven by the vendors. The vendors have 10 people in the meeting. For those 10 people in the meeting, they have 40 or 50 in the back office working away on the detailed specs. And we just don't have the resources to do that. But we do have vendors who want to sell things to us. So an operator's voice is quite powerful in 3GPP because it says to the community, well, yes, there is a market for this technology. So we're finding that the vendors come to us and say, well, we've got this new idea for some new technology. Are you interested? And then we analyse it and see how that meets with our goals. And quite often it is useful to us, so we will support it, and then we'll try and push it through. And then other times we have our own specific things that come along, like in 4G we've got this carrier aggregation where you've got 800 megahertz you want to combine with 1800 megahertz, let's say. That was done some time ago. As I mentioned before, for Latin America, we have networks there that have different combinations, and recently we've been asking vendors to help us with defining the aggregation combinations that are needed in Latin America.
What would you say are the biggest challenges in developing the 5G standard?
There are a number of different challenges. First of all, there's distinguishing 5G from 4G, and when do you stop working on 4G and start working on 5G? And that's going to be very difficult because there's a kind of roller coaster, particularly in 3GPP, there's a roller coaster of stuff you have these releases, release 11, 12, 13, 14, and something gets delayed from one release to the next release, and there's an expectation by someone who's got some technology they want to use that if they miss out on release 13, it'll go into release 14. But actually, at some point, you've got to have to cut that and say, okay, now we're going to work on 5G. And I think that we'll start to see what's going to happen with that in September when 3GPP has its 5G workshop. Our challenge from the NGMN point of view is going to be able to say, well, we've done all this work on the 5G white paper. Do we need to fine-tune? During this year, we'll be doing some fine-tuning. And at the same time, we'll be promoting that into 3GPP and possibly into ETSI or some other bodies which are giving technology that we need. Because it's obviously not just radio, it's also the core network, the NFV, SCN that we need to develop.
And how do you think 5G will affect users and influence society?
I think 5G will give society a number of new advancements. I mean, when you talk about 1 millisecond latency, when you talk about providing special services for Internet of Things, there will be lots and lots of use cases we haven't thought of before. But in particular, we'll be able to get things like interactive gaming will get much better. Sharing videos, sharing high-quality photographs, being immersive video will be actually possible, whereas today that's not so possible. And of course, as I said, there's lots of other things that are going to come along that we'll be able to use that we can't really dream of at the moment, because 2020 is a way off and the market still has to develop and get to grips with the tools that they've got. And I think that's happened throughout history. We've had 2G, people thought it was a phone, it's got this thing called SMS, we don't want to use that. But then eventually it was started to be used, and then we didn't imagine with SMS the way it would eventually be used. And I think the same thing was true with 3G. We sort of thought everybody is going to be doing video calling with 3G, and that didn't really happen either. And as smartphones came along, we didn't predict that. They've really been able to make use of 4G, and we expect even better things as the future comes along.
Kevin, thanks very much indeed.